You know, when we think of a university, we probably picture a place of learning, a sanctuary for truth. But what if that's just the cover story? Today, we're going to peel back the ivy and look at the university's hidden, 900-year-old purpose. Not really to seek truth, but to forge the very language of power itself.
And that brings us to this really provocative idea at the heart of our explainer. The argument is that the university's main product isn't actually knowledge, it's legitimacy. It creates a whole class of professionals, your lawyers, your managers, your policy experts, who are trained not to question the system, but to become its most eloquent defenders.
So, how in the world did this happen? Well, to really understand the university of today, we have to go way back. I mean, all the way back to the beginning. We're about to uncover a blueprint that was forged centuries ago, but still shapes our world today. It's a journey into the hidden history of an institution we thought we knew.
Right. So our story kicks off in the Middle Ages. And you really have to forget any image you have of scholars just quietly pursuing knowledge. The university's real core function as this ideological engine was created right here, in a world of empires and popes and kings, where everyone needed a way to prove their power was justified.
Just look at this timeline. We're talking about institutions that are almost 1,000 years old. And they weren't founded for some abstract pursuit of truth. Nope. Bologna was built specifically to train lawyers in Roman law for the Holy Roman Emperor. Paris became the theological brain of the Catholic Church. And Salamanca, well, it later provided the moral and legal cover for the Spanish Empire's conquests.
Now, at the heart of all this legal training was this incredibly powerful concept from Roman law called dominium. This wasn't just about, owning a piece of land. It was a whole framework for absolute sovereignty, the right to rule. It gave people a legal language to turn brute force and conquest into a legitimate legal title that you could pass down. It made ownership, not justice, the foundation of the whole social order.
So let's just be super clear here. From day one, these universities were never neutral, not even close. They were strategic tools of power. They cranked out the legal experts, the theological justifications, and the administrators needed to run an empire and make it all seem like it was God's plan.
Okay, now let's hit the fast-forward button a few hundred years. The crowns and the religious robes might be gone, but the university's core mission, it just adapted. It found a new master to serve, the market. And it transformed from this medieval workshop into a modern factory, producing a whole new kind of priesthood.
I mean, this slide really says it all, doesn't it? The old religious robes are replaced by business suits. The sacred texts are replaced by spreadsheets and legal codes. This new secular priesthood is made up of all the managers and lawyers and consultants who run the machinery of the modern corporation and state, and they all speak the language of efficiency and shareholder value.
Just look at this comparison for a second. The function is basically identical. The medieval priest used theology to justify divine order. The modern professional uses economic models to justify the market order. One served the church and crown, the other serves the corporation and state. And here's the kicker. Legitimacy doesn't come from God anymore. It comes from a university credential.
And at the very pinnacle of this modern system, well, you guessed it, the Ivy League. The argument here is that these elite schools aren't really about education first and foremost. They're a credentialing regime, a super sophisticated machine for reproducing the ruling class, generation after generation, all while making inherited advantage look like merit.
And the roles they play are highly specialized. Harvard Law School? It forges the legal elite. Harvard Business School spreads the gospel of profit maximization around the world. And Yale has famously been a primary recruiting ground for the CIA and the State Department. Each one is a direct pipeline into a specific corridor of power.
So you might be wondering, how does this machine actually work? How does the university keep this hierarchy going, while at the same time claiming to be a ladder of opportunity for everyone? Let's take a look at the tools of reproduction it uses.
So, the key concept to get here is cultural capital. It sounds academic, but it's really not. Think of it as the unwritten rules of the game, the way you talk, the books you've read, the casual confidence you have. The children of the elite show up to campus already fluent in this language. The university then just stamps this inherited advantage with a degree and calls it merit.
And this process plays out in 3 simple steps. First, selection. The admissions process naturally favors students who already have these cultural codes. Second, validation. The university then certifies these codes as academic excellence. And finally, conversion. That shiny degree converts this so-called merit into a job at a top investment bank or law firm. It's a perfect system for laundering social advantage.
The professional schools are where this gets perfected.
Law schools, they teach you how to translate raw injustice into neutral-sounding legal precedent. Business schools teach you that growth and profit are sacred duties. And policy schools, they teach you how to launder human suffering into abstract data points and tidy policy memos.
And maybe the most brilliant tool of all is professionalism itself. See, instead of wrestling with deep moral questions like is this right or is this wrong, students are just taught to follow professional codes of ethics. But these codes aren't really about morality. They're about serving the institution's goals and avoiding getting sued. They create this buffer, a detachment from the real-world harm of your work.
So, all of this brings us to the ultimate conclusion of this critique. It's this deep, really troubling gap between the university's promise and what it actually does. A journey from what was supposed to be enlightenment to what has become enlistment. We all know the dream, right? The promise of the university. A place to cultivate a truly free mind. A sanctuary where you can question everything, follow the truth no matter where it leads. The whole promise of enlightenment. But according to this critique, that dream, well, it's a facade. In reality, the university has become a factory of enlistment. It's an assembly line that takes in bright, curious young people and channels them directly into the service of the existing corporate and state machinery. This quote just cuts right to the heart of it. A conscripted mind doesn't learn how to challenge power. It learns how to navigate power. It's trained to become a specialist before it can even see the big picture. It's optimized for a good job, not for deep ethical thinking.
And the real endgame of this enlistment is the market. Graduates come out not with the tools to question the system, but with its values. Salary, promotion, metrics, just burned into their brains. They've been taught to see themselves not as critical citizens, but as products competing for the best price.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty unsettling question. If the university really is a factory of enlistment, training the officers for the armies of the state and of capital, what army are its graduates actually joining? And what does it mean to serve in those ranks?